My best friend forced me to wear plain clothes for the ball selection. She went insane when the hottest man picked me to be his date. Can you imagine pouring your heart and soul into a friendship, only to discover your best friend was actively trying to sabotage your happiness behind your back? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, the betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have ever imagined. Every year, there's this huge tradition at our university. The Marine Academy students come to pick dates for their formal ball. It's a whole spectacle. They march into the main courtyard in their dress uniforms, looking absolutely dashing, and formally ask someone to be their date. My best friend, Alexis, had been obsessed with this moment since freshman year. I mean, obsessed. For 3 years, she meticulously planned her outfit, practiced her surprised face in the mirror, and even strategized where we'd stand in the courtyard. She was convinced multiple Marines would flock to her, and she'd have the pleasure of picking the best one. When senior year finally rolled around, the day of the ball selection was upon us. She dragged me out of bed at 5 a.m. to do her hair and makeup. She was wearing this stunning $200 red dress she'd bought specifically for this occasion. She made me wear regular jeans and a plain shirt. Her reasoning? She didn't want us to compete for attention, and besides, Marines never pick girls like me anyway. She even said I was the supportive friend type, not the chosen type, and that I should be happy with that role. Ouch. Even then it stung, but I just brushed it off. We stood in the courtyard with what felt like 200 other girls, and Alexis positioned us right in the dead center, where she knew she'd be seen. When the Marines marched in, the entire place went silent. About 30 of them, all in their crisp, formal uniforms. But then I saw him. Leading the pack was this guy straight out of a movie. 6 feet 3 inches, perfect posture, and these incredible green eyes that seemed to sparkle from across the courtyard. Alexis gripped my arm so tight, I swear it left bruises, and hissed, "He's mine." She immediately started posing, flipping her hair, doing everything she could to catch his eye. He walked straight toward us, and Alexis, with her perfected surprised face ready, stepped forward. But he walked right past her. He stopped in front of me. "Hi," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "My name is Colin. Would you do me the honor of being my date to the Marine Ball?" Alexis literally gasped out loud, like a full dramatic gasp. She tried to step between us, stammering, "There must be some mistake." Colin, ever so politely, just moved around her and kept his gaze fixed on me, waiting. When I managed to choke out a yes, he smiled, a genuinely warm smile, and handed me a formal invitation with his contact information. Alexis just stood there, frozen, as other Marines picked their dates all around us. Not a single one approached her. For the rest of the day, Alexis didn't speak a word to me. Not one. When we got back to our apartment, that's when the explosion happened. She practically screamed that I must have done something to trick him, that I'd secretly talked to him before. She accused me of secretly preparing for this, pretending not to care so she wouldn't suspect. "You knew how much this meant to me," she wailed. "You deliberately stole my moment." She used the word stole, like Colin was some possession she'd claimed. She demanded I text Colin, tell him I couldn't go, that I was sick or had a boyfriend, anything to get out of it. When I refused, she spat, "You're the worst friend in the world. Plain girls like you don't deserve guys like Colin. He probably felt sorry for you or lost a bet and had to pick the ugliest girl he could find." The next 2 days were pure agony. She gave me the silent treatment, but her phone was buzzing nonstop. She was texting everyone we knew, telling them I'd betrayed her, that I'd been planning this for months and sabotaged her chances. But then she did something truly unforgivable. While I was in the shower, she took my phone. She texted Colin, pretending to be me. She told him I'd changed my mind, that I wasn't interested in military guys, and had only said yes to be polite. Then she deleted the conversation. Colin didn't text me for 3 days. I thought he'd ghosted me, that Alexis had been right. My heart ached. Then his roommate reached out, asking why I'd been so cruel in my rejection. That's when the pieces clicked into place, and my blood ran cold. I immediately contacted Colin and explained everything. The relief in his voice was palpable. He told me he'd actually been incredibly excited to take me. He confessed he'd noticed me volunteering at the Campus Veterans Center for months, thinking I was beautiful and kind, and he'd specifically come to our university, hoping to ask me. We made plans for the ball, but I didn't tell Alexis I'd fix things. Instead, I told her she was right. Colin hadn't contacted me again, so I probably wouldn't go. She immediately perked up. Suddenly my friend again saying, "See? I knew. He didn't really want you." The night of the Marine Ball, Alexis was in our apartment, curled up on the couch watching movies and eating ice cream, convinced I was moping in my room, just like her. But I was at the ball, wearing a gorgeous navy dress my sister had lent me, dancing with Colin. He was funny, smart, and genuinely interested in me. I got back to the apartment around 10 a.m., still floating. The ball had been perfect. Colin had been perfect. My feet hurt from dancing, and I had glitter in my hair, but I didn't care. I opened the door as quietly as possible. Alexis was exactly where I'd left her, still in her pajamas, watching a rom-com, eating directly from a pint of ice cream. The apartment smelled like stale popcorn, tissues scattered everywhere. My stomach twisted with guilt, even though I knew what she'd done was infinitely worse. She looked up. "How was your moping evening?" she asked with this fake, saccharine sympathy that made my skin crawl. I clutched my small purse behind my back, hiding it. It held my phone and the formal invitation Colin gave me, his number scrawled on the back. "Fine," I said, heading straight for my room. "Just watch some stuff on my laptop." "I knew you'd get over him eventually," she called after me. "Guys like that don't actually go for girls like us anyway. They just do the whole formal asking thing because it's tradition." I closed my door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The navy dress was still in my car. I'd changed in the parking lot before coming up. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone. Colin had texted me twice already, asking if I got home safe and saying he had an amazing time. I smiled, texted him back, and then shoved my phone under my pillow when I heard Alexis moving around. The next few days were weird. I texted Colin constantly, but it felt like I was doing something illegal, hiding every interaction. He wanted to see me again, but every time I thought about running into someone who might mention the ball to Alexis, my stomach churned. We finally agreed to meet for coffee 2 miles off campus, a quiet place where no students ever went. I got there first, tucked away in a back corner booth. Colin arrived 10 minutes later, in jeans and a t-shirt, no uniform. He looked different but still amazing. He slid into the booth and reached across the table to hold my hand. I pulled it back, scanning the room nervously. "Sorry," I whispered. "I'm just being careful." We talked about nothing important for a while. Then he got quiet, looking at me seriously. "Can I ask you something?" He stirred sugar into his coffee. "Why are we meeting 2 miles off campus like we're having an affair? You know, I want to take you out for real. Actual dates where we don't have to hide." It all spilled out. The whole messy story about Alexis sabotaging me, texting him from my phone, how I'd fixed it without telling her, how I'd let her believe he'd ghosted me to avoid her freakout, my lies about not going to the ball, her thinking I'd spent that night alone. Colin listened, his coffee getting cold. "That's really messed up," he said when I finished. "What she did with your phone. That's not what friends do." "I know," I admitted, picking at my napkin. "But if I tell her now that I went to the ball and we're seeing each other, she'll lose it. She'll make my life terrible. We live together, share all the same friends." Colin was quiet for a minute. "So, you're going to keep lying to her. For how long?" "I don't know," I confessed, "until I figure out what to do." He reached across the table again, and this time I let him take my hand. "I get it," he said softly. "Toxic friendships are hard. I had a buddy at the academy like that. Always competing, always making me feel bad about myself. But here's the thing. You're letting Alexis control your life, even though she doesn't know she's doing it. You're hiding and sneaking around, and that's not fair to you or to me. Honestly, that hit me harder than I expected. He was right. I was still letting Alexis dictate my life, just like I had for years. I just nodded, staring into my cold coffee. A week after the ball, Colin texted me. His sister, Margot, was visiting campus, and he really wanted me to meet her. He suggested lunch at the student union. My stomach dropped. The student union was right in the middle of campus, where everyone ate. But something about the way he asked. I agreed. I met them at noon. Margot had Colin's piercing green eyes but darker hair, and she hugged me like we'd known each other forever. We got food and sat by the windows. I kept looking around nervously, expecting to see Alexis or one of our mutual friends. You two had a great time at the ball, Margot said, biting into her sandwich. He wouldn't shut up about you for weeks before it. Really? I looked at Colin, and he just shrugged, an embarrassed smile on his face. He told her about me volunteering at the Veteran Center, that he'd noticed me there months ago. Margot listened, asking about my major and my plans. She was so easy to talk to, the kind of person who makes you feel instantly comfortable. Then she noticed me scanning the entrance again. You okay? You seem nervous. So I explained. The whole Alexis situation, from the beginning to now. Margot's expression changed as I spoke, moving from interested to concerned, to almost angry. Let me get this straight, she said when I finished. This girl made you dress down so you wouldn't compete with her. Then, when a guy still chose you, she sabotaged you and has spent years making you feel like you're not good enough. And you're still protecting her feelings. When she said it like that, it sounded completely insane. I know it's complicated, I mumbled. It's not complicated, Margot cut in, putting down her fork. Real friends don't spend years making you feel less than. They don't manipulate you or tear you down. And honestly, sometimes the trash just takes itself out. You just have to let it go. Colin nodded in agreement. I sat there, feeling like they'd just stated the most obvious truth that I'd been desperately refusing to see. We finished lunch, and as we walked out, we ran straight into Dominic from my dorm building with his girlfriend, Sarah. Hey, Dominic grinned. You looked amazing at the ball the other night. I didn't know you and Colin were together. My stomach dropped to my feet. I could feel Colin and Margot both looking at me, waiting. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, gushing about how cute we looked dancing. Thanks, I managed, my voice thin. Can you maybe not mention it to anyone, though? It's kind of private. Dominic looked confused. Why would it be private? Everyone thought you guys looked great together. Half the people there were talking about it. I'd appreciate it if you didn't bring it up, please. He shrugged. Okay, sure, whatever you want. But it's not a secret. Like, people were posting pictures and everything. They walked into the union. And I stood there, feeling sick to my stomach. Colin touched my arm gently. It's going to come out eventually, he said. You know that, right? I knew. I just wasn't ready. 2 days later, I was in my biology lecture, trying to focus on cellular respiration, when my phone started buzzing in my bag. I ignored it at first, but it just kept going. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I pulled it out under my desk and saw 12 texts from Alexis. My hands started shaking as I opened them. The first one just said, "What the fuck?" The second was a screenshot of an Instagram post from someone at the ball, a group photo, and there I was in the background in my navy dress, Colin's arm around my waist, both of us smiling, tagged with both our names. The next 10 messages got progressively angrier. She asked why I lied, called me a snake, said she couldn't believe I'd betrayed her. The last one just said we needed to talk immediately. I couldn't focus for the rest of class. The professor's voice became background noise as I stared at my phone, watching the messages pile up. By the time class ended, there were 20. I walked back to the apartment slowly, taking the long way, dreading what was waiting for me. Alexis was standing in the living room with her arms crossed when I opened the door. Her face was red, her eyes wild. "Why did you lie to me?" She didn't even say hello. "You went to the ball. You went with Colin. And you let me think you stayed home feeling sorry for yourself." I tried to explain. I told her about finding out she'd texted him from my phone, about fixing things, about being scared of how she'd react. But she talked over me before I could get 3 sentences out. "You deliberately humiliated me. You snuck around behind my back and made me look stupid to everyone who knew the real story. Do you know how many people must have seen you there and then watched me talk about how Colin didn't want you? You're the one who texted him from my phone." My voice was getting louder now. "You sabotaged me first." "Because you stole my moment," she was yelling. "You knew how much that ball meant to me. You knew I'd been planning for it for 3 years, and you just took it." "I didn't take anything," I retorted. "Colin chose me. That's not something you can steal." The argument raged for 20 minutes. She kept saying I'd been plotting against her, that I must have contacted Colin beforehand. She called me a snake and a fake friend. She said I'd been pretending to be supportive while stabbing her in the back. I tried to stay calm, but finally I just lost it. "You sabotaged me first." I yelled again. "You texted Colin from my phone and told him I didn't want to go. You deleted the messages, so I wouldn't know. And you've been undermining my confidence for 3 years by calling me the supportive friend type and acting like I should be grateful you even hang out with me." Alexis went completely silent. For about 10 seconds, she just stared at me. Then, her expression hardened, turning cold. "You're delusional if you think Colin actually likes you. He probably felt sorry for the sad girl in plain clothes. Or maybe it was a dare. Pick the ugliest girl you can find. That's probably what happened." Something inside me broke, but not in the way it usually did when she said things like that. This time, instead of hurt, I felt pure, crystal clear clarity. I could see the pattern so clearly now. Years of little comments designed to keep me small. Years of positioning herself as the pretty one, the chosen one, while I was supposed to accept being the backup friend. "I'm done," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm done listening to you tear me down. I'm done pretending this is a normal friendship. You don't treat people you care about like this." She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You'll come crawling back. You always do. Because without me, you're nobody." I walked to my room and closed the door. I could hear her in the living room, slamming things. Then my phone started buzzing again. I looked at it and saw she was posting on social media. I opened Instagram, and there it was, a long, detailed thread about how I'd betrayed her, secretly going to the ball after she'd been so gracious about Colin choosing me. She made it sound like she'd been totally supportive, and I'd just snuck around behind her back for no reason. She carefully edited out the part where she sabotaged me, making herself look like the victim of my cruel deception. My phone exploded with messages. Mutual friends asking what happened, people taking sides. Some believed her version, some asked for mine. I sat on my bed, watching the notifications pile up, and realized she was forcing my hand. I could either publicly defend myself or let everyone believe I was the villain in her carefully crafted story. I sat there staring at my phone until 3 a.m. The notifications kept coming in waves. I opened a blank post and started typing, my hands shaking. I deleted entire paragraphs, rewrote them. I wanted people to understand what really happened, but I didn't want to destroy Alexis publicly, even though she'd tried to destroy me. Around 4 a.m., I finally had something that felt honest. I explained how she'd texted Colin from my phone while I was in the shower and deleted the conversation. I attached screenshots showing the message she'd sent and the timestamp proving I was showering. I wrote about how she'd spent 3 years telling me I was the supportive friend type. I kept it factual, trying not to sound like I was attacking her. I read it 12 times before finally hitting post at 5 a.m. Then I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut down. When I woke up 3 hours later, my phone had exploded with responses. Some people were shocked about the text message sabotage, saying they couldn't believe Alexis would do that. Others commented that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball, and that deceiving her made me just as bad. A few mutual friends said we were both being dramatic over a guy and needed to grow up. One girl I barely knew wrote a long comment about how the whole situation was toxic and we both needed therapy. I felt sick reading through everything. No matter what I said, some people were going to think I was the villain. My phone rang around 2 p.m. Colin's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, embarrassed about the whole public mess. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice angry but not at me. He said he'd seen everything on social media and couldn't believe Alexis had sabotaged me like that. He asked why I hadn't told him about all the other stuff she'd said over the years, about me being the supportive friend type. I explained that I'd gotten so used to her comments. I didn't even recognize them as put-downs anymore. Colin got quiet for a moment, then told me about his former best friend from high school who constantly competed with him over everything. Grades, sports, girls, even stupid stuff like who could do more push-ups. He said it took him 2 years after graduating to realize that real friends don't make you feel like you're always losing some invisible competition. We talked for over an hour about toxic friendships and why people stay in them. He said something that really stuck with me. Sometimes we accept treatment from friends that we'd never accept from a stranger because we confuse history with loyalty. I felt less alone after that call. Someone finally understood why this whole situation was so complicated. That evening, someone knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it expecting Alexis, but found Liliana Gonzalez instead. She lived next door, and we'd always been friendly but not close. She asked if she could come in, and I let her. She sat on my desk chair and said she was glad I finally stood up to Alexis. I must have looked surprised because she laughed and said she'd been watching the dynamic between us for 3 years. She told me Alexis treated me badly, and she'd wanted to say something before, but didn't want to cause drama. She'd seen how Alexis always positioned herself as the pretty one and made subtle comments that kept my confidence low. She even offered to be a witness if I needed to talk to housing about a hostile living situation. I thanked her, so grateful. I usually kept to myself and didn't realize anyone had noticed. She hugged me before leaving and said, "Real friends build you up instead of tearing you down." The next week was exhausting. Our mutual friend group basically split into factions. Some people sided completely with Alexis, outright ignoring me in the dining hall. Others thought her text message sabotage was worse than my deception and made a point to sit with me. Most people just seemed tired of the whole situation and avoided both of us. I lost a few friends I'd had since freshman year who believed Alexis's version that I'd been plotting against her. But I also got closer to people like Liliana and Dominic, who told me they'd always thought something was off about how Alexis treated me. Dominic pulled me aside one day and said he'd watched Alexis manipulate situations for years and was relieved I finally saw through it. The social fallout felt like middle school drama, but it was real and it hurt losing people I'd considered friends. Living in the same apartment with Alexis became unbearable. We barely spoke, except when absolutely necessary. She'd make pointed comments about fake friends whenever I walked through the living room. She'd turn up the TV volume when I was trying to study. She'd leave her dishes in the sink for days, knowing it bothered me. I started spending most of my time at the library or at Colin's place, just to avoid being home. I went to the housing coordinator's office and explained the situation. She was sympathetic and said I could request a room change for spring semester, but nothing was available until then. 6 more weeks. I counted down the days, trying to stay out of the apartment as much as possible. Colin invited me to a Marine Academy event 3 weeks after everything blew up. I was nervous, worried his friends would have heard about the drama. But when we arrived, everyone was welcoming and treated me like I belonged there. Colin introduced me to Declan Knight, one of his closest friends. Declan's date, a really friendly girl, mentioned that Colin had talked about me for weeks before the ball selection. She said he'd been planning how to ask me and was worried I might say no. I looked at Colin, and he just smiled and squeezed my hand. Being around people who didn't know about the Alexis situation and just saw me as Colin's girlfriend felt incredibly refreshing. No one was judging me or taking sides. They just accepted me. Declan's date also said Colin had told everyone I volunteered at the Veterans Center, and that's what first caught his attention. Hearing that made Alexis's claims that he felt sorry for me seem even more ridiculous. I was making coffee in the apartment kitchen one morning when Alexis walked in. We'd been avoiding each other for 3 weeks, and the sudden proximity made me tense. She stood there for a moment, then said we needed to talk like adults. I cautiously agreed and turned to face her. She said she'd been thinking, and she was sorry for texting Colin from my phone. My hope lifted for a second, until she immediately added that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball. She said we both made mistakes, but mine was worse because I deliberately deceived her. I realized this was as close to an apology as she was capable of giving, one that still made everything partially my fault. She couldn't just apologize without adding conditions or spreading the blame. I took a deep breath and told her I appreciated the partial apology, but I couldn't go back to a friendship where she needed me to be less confident so she could feel better about herself. I told her her years of subtle insults about me being the supportive friend type had really damaged me, even if she didn't mean them that way. She looked genuinely surprised, like she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she was just being honest about our different social roles, that some people are naturally more outgoing and attractive while others are better in supporting roles. She said I was being oversensitive and reading too much into normal friend observations. That confirmed everything I needed to know. She fundamentally didn't understand how her words had affected me, and probably never would. We reached an agreement, civil roommates for the remaining weeks. No more pointed comments, no more social media drama, just polite coexistence until housing changes in January. It wasn't friendship, and it wasn't the closure some people expected, but it was livable. I felt relieved to have clear boundaries, even if they weren't the reconciliation everyone thought we should have. Some mutual friends seemed disappointed that we didn't hug and make up, but I was done pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Finals week came and went. I got approval for a room change to a single for spring semester. I packed up my stuff the day after my last exam and moved everything to my parents' house for winter break. My sister picked me up, and on the drive home, she asked how I was doing. I told her everything that happened since the ball. She was quiet for a while, then said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said watching me accept Alexis's treatment for 3 years had been hard, but she knew I had to figure it out on my own. My parents were supportive, even though they'd always liked Alexis and seemed sad the friendship ended. My mom said sometimes friendships run their course, and that's okay. My dad asked if I was sure I'd tried everything to fix it. I explained that you can't fix a friendship where one person needs the other to stay small. They both hugged me and said they understood. Having their support felt validating, even though the situation was complicated and messy. Winter break arrived with the quiet relief of distance and space. Colin and I started doing video calls every few days, and those conversations felt different from any friendship I'd had before. He'd ask about my day and actually listen to my answers without redirecting the conversation back to himself. When I mentioned feeling nervous about a family dinner, he didn't tell me I was overreacting or that other people had it worse. He just said my feelings made sense and asked what would help me feel better. I noticed how different this was from years of Alexis dismissing my concerns or turning them into opportunities to talk about her own problems. One night we were on a call and I mentioned missing the campus Veterans Center where we'd first crossed paths. Colin smiled and said he'd been hoping I'd bring that up. He told me he'd visited 3 times before the ball selection, always timing it so he could see me interact with the older vets. and he'd been working up the courage to introduce himself for weeks. Hearing that made something shift in my chest. Alexis had spent years convincing me that guys like Colin didn't notice girls like me unless they felt sorry for us. But Colin had noticed me specifically because of my character and kindness, not despite some imagined flaw. We made plans for spring semester, including study dates at the library and weekend trips to nearby hiking trails. And I realized I was building something real with someone who genuinely wanted me to succeed and feel confident. My sister came into my room one afternoon and caught me smiling at my phone during a text conversation with Colin. She sat on my bed and said she was glad I'd finally found someone who treated me the way I deserved. That validation from her meant everything, because she'd watched the Alexis friendship damage my self-worth for 3 years. Spring semester started with me moving into my single room in a different building. The freedom of that space felt incredible. I could decorate however I wanted without worrying about Alexis's opinions. I could study without her pointed comments about how some people had to work harder than others. I could just exist without constantly monitoring whether I was being too confident or too successful or too anything. 3 weeks into the semester, I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall when I saw Alexis at a table across the room with some girls from her communications class. Our eyes met for a brief second, and we both nodded politely before looking away. No dramatic confrontation. No tears or apologies or attempts to rehash everything. Just two people who used to share everything and now shared nothing. I sat with Liliana and Declan, who had become real friends over the past few months, people who celebrated my successes instead of finding ways to diminish them. Colin joined us a few minutes later and kissed my cheek before sitting down. I caught Alexis watching from across the room, with an expression I couldn't quite read. I turned back to my friends and focused on the conversation at my table instead of worrying about what she thought. Sometimes I felt sad about losing what I thought Alexis and I had, but mostly I felt this profound relief to be free of constantly feeling like I wasn't enough. It's truly eye-opening when you realize the person you called your best friend was actually keeping you small. Have you ever had a friendship that made you feel like you weren't good enough, or one where you constantly felt like you were walking on eggshells? How did you find the courage to break free? I'd really love to hear your stories in the comments below.